A couple of things before we get into that text. Really appreciate John's communion thoughts. I joked a couple of weeks ago when Alan came up here about giving quiet people a mic, and I specifically said, John, we should have John next, and his wife outed him and said, he's got something on his heart he wants to share. And so thank you for outing him. I appreciate that. And I really appreciate his words, especially about before the offering. John, I believe you. I believe your words, and I think that's important. I know you believe those words. And he specifically said, if you have a need, let us know. And I think that really is important. I would reiterate that. I'm not saying that's a promise that we can meet whatever need you have and do whatever it takes, but we can try. And I also want to say, again, on outing people, sometimes you need to out people. There are some people who have a need but can't say it. And we've seen that before where we find out one of our members is living in a situation that they should not be living in, but they didn't want to say anything. We want to help you. We want to help those people. So it's okay to out people. It's not gossip if you're coming to an elder or someone who can help with that situation. So please let us know. I also saw Sydney here. Caleb and Sydney Powell are here. This is their first Sunday here as a married couple. So glad you guys are here. I'm so happy for y'all. We have some first Mother's Days as a mom. So Skyla, this is her first Mother's Day. That's super exciting, and Sharon as well. So really cool. And we're going to look at a special mom this morning. So we see in the text there is a mom who comes and kind of asks for these seats of honor. And normally when you look at this text, it leads into what I think is one of Jesus's greatest teachings, or it's a culmination of a lot of Jesus's teaching about the first will be last, and last shall be first, about this great reversal. Jesus redefines greatness. To be great is to sacrifice, is to serve. And so that's really normally when you read this text, that's where it goes. But I want to look at it from a different angle this morning. Because see, her making this request, it makes the other disciples mad. And they should be. It looks like James and John are kind of going behind their back, trying to get Jesus alone and circumnavigate them and kind of secure these spots, secure these places of honor, secure these places of power. And some of the other disciples are probably thinking, what gives you the right? What makes you better? I want those spots. I want to be at your right or at your left. Some of them are probably thinking that. Thaddeus, some of those other no-name guys that we don't even remember their names, they probably weren't thinking that. They don't have those spots. But maybe Peter, maybe Andrew are thinking, no, that should be our spots. So there's kind of this fight about greatness that breaks out between them because of this. Now, it's pretty interesting if you compare this story in the other Gospels. We believe Mark was the first gospel written. And in Mark, it tells the story a little bit differently. In Mark, it's not the mom going and making this request. It's James and John directly. And they kind of sound entitled the way they say it. They're like, hey, Jesus, we're going to ask you a question. Give us whatever we want. And then they ask about being at the right and at the left. It sounds a little entitled. We believe that Mark, you can think of it as being written by Peter. Peter on his deathbed, apparently according to tradition, relayed some of these stories to Mark, and Mark is the one writing them down. And he almost sounds sour about it. Like, oh, these entitled guys went and tried to secure this spot behind my back. That's the way it kind of reads in Mark. But Matthew gives this different take. Matthew includes the mom. And so I want you to think about that. If James and John are going directly and asking for this in kind of an entitled way, does it change the way you feel about them if you see that it is the mom going and asking for these places of honor? And the mom, she does it in a little more of a reverent way as well. She comes and she kneels down in front of him like he's an authority. Like she's pleading for mercy. She's reproaching him as if he is a king. And it's more of a plea. It's not entitled. And she wants this for her boys, not for herself. She wants this place of honor and power for her boys. So does that change the story for you a little bit? Does that change how you view James and John here? It should change it. And it could change it in a few different ways, depending on what's really going on here. And it could make you like them more, or it might actually make you like them less, depending on what may have happened behind the scenes to make this event happen. And the way you take this event, it might be shaped by how you view your relationship with your mom. So do you read into this event as the mom going and asking Jesus for her boys to have this place of power without their permission? Is she like taking matters into her own hands and trying to secure this place for them without them saying, hey, mom, will you do that? She's kind of meddling with their affairs maybe a little bit. Sometimes moms do that. They go and they advocate for their kids without their kids even asking. They intercede and try to secure the best for them without their kids saying, hey, mom, would you do this for me? It's well-meaning. And I think in here she's well-meaning. This is done in love. Talked a couple of weeks ago, maybe she's being a bit of a lawnmower parent, trying to pave the way for her kids and make it real easy and set them up for success. Maybe that's what's a little bit of what's going on here. But it's a loving thing to do. We don't want to knock her for this. This is nice. And I remember my mom doing stuff like this for me without me asking. I actually remember the first time I was embarrassed by my mom. And I'm about to relive it with you guys. I remember I was 4 years old. I know I was 4 because it was when I moved from Carrollton to El Paso. And I was at our new church in El Paso, and I guess I was in like the nursery or pre-K place, and it's my first Sunday there. And my mom goes up to these kids and pulls them aside and says, hey, that's my son over there. He's new here, and he doesn't have any friends. And I already at this point, I'm like, no. And she says, will you be his friend? And they were like, oh, I guess. It actually worked out. It was super embarrassing. I was like, Mom, please don't do that. But it worked. I got some friends, and they were my friends for a long time, even though it was embarrassing. She was kind of overstepping, but it was done in love, and it worked out. It didn't work out so well when she did that in high school. But some of you are like, how did he get Brianna? Thanks for that one, Mom. My son's kind of a loser. Will you date him? But if I was James and John in this situation, and she's going and asking Jesus for them to have these places of authority and power without their permission, I would be embarrassed. I would be like, Mom, please don't do that. You are way overstepping. We don't want you to be a part of that. Please, no. I would be racing to stop her. I would be embarrassed. Because mommy's just kind of like swooping in and trying to advocate for me. Please don't do that. But if you kind of read into the story, it does kind of sound like they were kind of in on it. Because when Jesus addresses her, he kind of changes and he starts addressing them. So maybe once she asked, they're like, well, let's see how this goes. Let's see if we really can get these places of power. And of course, Jesus asked them, I'm going to suffer. Are you willing to suffer like me? And so he's addressing the mom, but then he is addressing them. So they are present. And which is really interesting. We don't have time to unpack this a whole lot. But they say, on your right and on your left, we want to be at those spots. And later on in the text, we see that exact same words being used. Guys on his right and on his left, on the cross, on crosses. So it's all tied in with suffering. To follow Jesus sometimes means suffering. And that's kind of what Jesus kind of alludes to there. But you might read this in another way. You might read this in a way where they're kind of afraid to ask Jesus themselves, so they put mommy up to it. That one's kind of hard for me to respect. But it kind of looks like maybe that's what's going on. What a bunch of sissies. And I've seen this before. I've seen people who they can't go do it themselves, so they put someone else up to it. Maybe their mom, maybe their wife, and they say, will you do it? I'm a little afraid to do that, which I respect that less. And so I'm really surprised in that situation if the mom came and asked that Jesus wasn't like, well, if James and John want to put on their big boy pants, maybe they can come and ask me themselves. Because that's kind of what it looks like is going on here. But maybe something that's cool, if that is what happened, if they were putting her up to it, maybe she had a special relationship with Jesus. Maybe they thought, kind of hard for Jesus to tell our mom no. He loves our mom. They get along really well. Maybe he'd be more inclined to give in if she asked, because she's really a bit of a mysterious figure, James and John's mom. She pops up in Scripture a few times. Here in this text, the context here is they are traveling to Jerusalem. And this is asked on the way to Jerusalem, and to Jerusalem for Passion Week. This is nearing the end of his ministry. So she was a follower of Jesus. She was close to all of them. She traveled with them. She knew them well. And look in the scripture here. We see her as a witness to the crucifixion. Matthew 27, 55 through 56. Many women were also there, looking on from a distance. This is at Jesus at the cross. They had followed Jesus from Galilee, ministering to him. Among them were Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James and Joseph, and the mother of the sons of Zebedee. So here she is when all the other disciples had left him. They'd all deserted him. Here's a few women looking on from a distance who are still there, still faithful enough to follow him all the way to the cross. Pretty cool. She obviously was a woman who believed in the power of Jesus and the ultimate destiny of Jesus. She had great faith. While she didn't know, whenever she asked Jesus about, hey, can my son be at your right and left? She didn't totally know what she was asking, and Jesus points that out. But she knew Jesus was going to set up some sort of kingdom, whether it be on earth or in heaven. She believed. And asking for her sons to be a part of that, as obnoxious as it is, she really believed in who Jesus was. She really believed that she was on the verge of something great. And I think any mom kind of has to ask, I want my kids to be a part of this. I want my kids to be right there with you. So I can't knock her for that. We also know, guess, speculate, whatever you want to say, most likely her name is Salome. Because you can look at Mark and Matthew, a lot of the Gospels overlap. You can see sometimes when they overlap, that's how we figure out people's names. So you can see here in Mark 15, some women were there watching from a distance, including Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, the younger, and Joseph, and Salome. So in one text, it's Mary the mother of James and John. Here it's Salome, so we're supposing her name's Salome. They had been followers of Jesus and had cared for him while he was in Galilee. You can see Matthew changes that a little bit. Matthew makes it sound like, oh, they just followed him from Galilee. But Mark goes a little bit of a step further and says, no, they are followers of Jesus. Not just one time, they're followers. He stops just short of making them formal disciples, formal students of Jesus. But they're ones who minister to him. Probably maybe setting it whenever they travel around, taking care of food, taking care of housing situations, making it easier for them to do, for Jesus to do the preaching ministry. We can only guess. But she is there, present, and knows him well. So this isn't a bad lady. This is a nice lady. We like Salome. But of course, her request, it stirs up this argument, and it leads to this great teaching about downward mobility. But what she's doing is a good thing. Women and moms in Scripture are praised for doing exactly what she's doing here. This is a good thing. They're praised for this kind of boldness and this kind of persistence. Esther is one I think of. She's not a mom, but you kind of think of Esther in this situation. A woman going to authority and pleading to that authority boldly on behalf of her people. Esther does it. Bathsheba does it. This is a story we don't look at as often. But Bathsheba, when David is on his deathbed, one of his sons, Adoniah, is about to be king. But Bathsheba goes in and intercedes and says, hey, David, is this what you wanted? I really thought you wanted my son Solomon to be king. So she's going to a king and advocating for her son. Very similar. Very similar. There's some allusions there to that event. And then the story of the faith of the Canaanite woman. Remember when Jesus is eating, this Canaanite woman comes in who's pleading with Jesus for her daughter. Save my daughter. Maybe he's not eating in the context, but they speak of eating. And this woman won't take no for an answer. You know, Jesus says, well, I'm only for the lost sheep of Israel. And she says, well, I just want the crumbs. So it's a woman pleading, not taking no, and Jesus is impressed with her faith. Every time these moms are advocating, every time these women are advocating for their people, for their kids, it's a good thing. They're praised for it. Some women are just hard to say no to. Some women, especially a mom on a mission for her kid, look out. Don't mess with that, mom. Look out. And that's something to be applauded. Some moms, when they know what they need for their kid, they're going to get it. You better buckle up and you better get out of the way. Moms love their kids in a fierce way. And I love that, and we need that. I remember as a youth minister, I was way more afraid of a protective mom than a protective dad. There were times where it was like, man, I would much rather deal with a dad right now. I'm scared. And that's an applaudable thing. But God seems to approve of a mother's persistence, doing whatever it takes to help, to save, to bless their kids. God approves of that. Now, some might call that stubborn, but not me. I would never do that. I would never call them that. But it's usually the moms doing this. Not to say dads don't do a lot of great things, not to say dads don't love their kids in really awesome ways, but sometimes the way a mom blesses and serves and loves their kids, it is different. I mean, we saw that up here as they were taught, as the kids were talking. It's different. But in Salome and in others, we see that a mom's love is often about persistence and doing whatever it takes to bless their kids. They will humble themselves if they have to. They will beg and get on their knees and beg if they have to. They will risk ridicule or pain for their kids. Rebecca's another story I didn't reference, but she's willing to risk being cursed for her kids. They will often try to pave the way for their kids to be successful. They'll do what it takes. A mom's love will sacrifice for her kids. And that was another question I asked up here, and I think that's an important one to think about for all of us. How has your mom sacrificed for you? You should acknowledge that. You should tell your mom that. Tell her how much you appreciate the sacrifice that she's given for you. Because there's something sacrificial about what all these moms are doing, what Salome does. It wasn't asking Jesus for her to be in that spot. She wasn't trying to secure her own position. She wanted her kids to be elevated. She wanted her kids to be lifted up. And so I like to think that she wasn't doing this to live vicariously through her kids. I think sometimes we do that. I think sometimes we're tempted to do that. That's an issue with us sometimes, right? We view our kids' success as an extension of our own. So we place pressure on them to perform. And maybe somewhat it's a little bit really about us. So we make our kids perform so we can feel better about ourselves. That's really unhealthy. That's really unfair to the kids. And so I do want to ask you, moms and dads, are we doing that sometimes? We need to keep that stuff in check. Ask ourselves, is that what we're doing? Are we trying to live vicariously through our kids? And also, look, I know it's hard not to do that when your kids are awesome, right? We got some awesome kids in here, so sometimes we're tempted to do that. But I don't think that's what Salome was doing here. I think she just wanted her kids to be elevated. Thinking of her sons joining God in this amazing redemptive work, that was just a great honor that she wanted her kids to have. And so she had to try. She wanted this amazing thing for her kids. And this isn't quite as extreme as writing that essay for them so they can get into that school. She's not doing stuff like that. She's not holding them back a grade so that they can dominate on the football team by being way older than everybody. That's not what she's doing here. I like what she's doing. So this mother's persistent love and sacrifice for her kids, it should be applauded. Maybe it's overstepping a little bit, okay? Maybe she's interceding a little bit more. I think moms do that a lot. And it's a loving thing, and we shouldn't be mad at them for it. Now, we need to be willing to set boundaries. Kids can set boundaries at some points in their lives. Parents, dads do it too. We need to be willing to respect some boundaries. We are the adult. We will cross them sometimes. But sometimes we need to be able to let the line out a little bit. But I will say this, kids, whenever you feel like it's not just moms who overstep, whenever you feel like either are overstepping, and if it really is crossing a line, I think it is helpful to acknowledge it's probably really done in love. It's probably not just because they're on a power trip and want to ruin your life. It's probably really out of love and wanting what's best for you. And so I think it's interesting to think about times when someone is trying to be helpful. They're trying to bless you. They are doing something out of love, but it ends up kind of being harmful. You ever see these situations? It's summer, or it's about to be summer, and so I'm I'm counting calories, which is no fun for anybody. But like someone like brings me like this nice lasagna, and it's like, I'm like Garfield, like that's awesome. And it's a nice thing for somebody to do, but it's like, ugh, you're making me either ruin my diet or not get to eat this delicious lasagna. So it doesn't end up being helpful, but it's like a loving thing, and I just need to appreciate that. And so sometimes we need to do that with parents. Hey, they're overstepping, but I know it's out of love. And I remember just thinking about my mom today. I'm thinking about my mom a lot today. One of the things she said about some of the kind of the grumpier church people who think everything's got to be a certain way, and I would go complain about them. Like I remember I wore flip-flops to church on a Wednesday night when I was in high school, and I got flack for it. And I remember thinking, well, maybe they want me to wear something more like what Jesus wore. I didn't say that, but I remember my mom like going and complaining to my mom about that, and my mom said, yeah, it's kind of silly, but they're just trying to please God. They're just doing what they know to please God. And I thought that was a really respectful way of looking at it. They really are, it kind of hurt, but it's really well-meaning. And so sometimes we need to look at our parents that way as like, man, they're overstepping, but it is done out of love, and I can at least value that. I like her interceding here. And we're going to see, and this is another tough thing as parents, is we got to know, when do we step in and when do we stay out of it? When do we release our kids? Next Sunday is Senior Sunday. We're releasing our kids, and we're going to look at a text of a parent who's got to release their kid. That is hard to do. And we need wisdom. We need prayer. We need guidance to figure out, where is the line? When do we step in and when do we release? And so we'll explore that more next week. But what I want you to hear this morning, a mother's love is a special love. And we often think of God as a father, and I think that's good, and I think that's healthy. God is a father. For some of us, though, that may kind of put a sour taste in our mouth. For some of us, that may mean, well, God's cold and distant, and he punishes me. There's a lot of different emotions that come up. But there were some things that the kids were saying up here about a mother's love that I believe God gives us. I think what I heard Mackenzie saying, and I like this, is that, you know what, sometimes I can just be with my mom. We can sit there and we don't even talk about anything. Just have comfort in her presence. We can just relax. And I love that. I love that we can have that with God. Sometimes it feels pretty good to think about God having a motherly type love for us. And there's a few illustrations in Scripture of God having a motherly type love. Hosea likens God to a mother bear protecting young. I can see that. Isaiah 66 says God will comfort Israel like a mother comforts a child. And Isaiah 49 says God is like a nursing mother. Really some of the stuff that John was talking about. God will provide. Jesus says he wants to gather his people together like a mother hen. So we see God has a motherly type love for us as well. And man, that feels good. Man, that makes me feel safe. Man, that makes me feel warm. So we see moms, like in this text, willing to go over the top. Do whatever it takes to bless their kids. Whatever it takes to help their kids be successful. Whatever it takes to protect them. Whatever it takes to get what the mom has dreamed for the kids. They'll do whatever it takes to get them there. That's a motherly love. I think God has that type of love for us as well. God willing to totally give everything. Give of everything. Willing to sacrifice everything on the cross. Willing to bless us, to make us his, and to pave the way for us to ultimately find success in him. If you're here this morning and you need prayers, if you need encouragement from the congregation, or if you want to give your life to Christ, we invite you to come now as together we stand and sing.